Welcome, welcome, weary football pilgrims, to lower leagues. Pull up a comfortable chair, or better yet, let your head nestle softly into the pillow. The day is done. The shoutings stopped. Somewhere beyond this quiet, the Yorkshire Terrier of modern life is still scampering in circles, tail chasing its way through the tangle of broadband cables and barking at things that only it can see. But not here, not now, tonight, in this quiet dimness. We're setting off on a slower sort of journey, a meander through the history of football tactics. Not the kind shouted over studio desks, or scribbled in fluorescent touchscreen rage, but the gentler rhythms that shape the game in silence, the hidden tugs and nudges, and the quiet revolutions. The ideas passed down in chalk dust, whispered in dugouts, and drawn in steam on the window of a cold team bus. So breathe, settle, and let the game unfold. In its nascent stages, you see, back in the late 19th century, when top hats were still considered perfectly acceptable pitch-side attire and a good strong constitution was your best tactical asset. Association football was a far cry from the strategically intricate ballet of the modern game. No, it was a simpler, more vigorous affair, often resembling, if one were being entirely honest, a disorganized scrum where players largely chased the ball with all the coordinated grace of a flock of startled sheep. There was little cooperative play, and as for defensive structure, well, that was largely left to the sturdy oak of the goalposts and the unyielding mud of the pitch. The prevailing focus, you understand, was predominantly on individual dribbling, a pure, unadulterated testament to the raw athleticism of the time. The game resembled a waterlogged battlefield with a parade of one-man armies, each utterly convinced that the shortest path to glory was to charge forward, dribbling past 3 defenders, and a puddle so deep it could drown a small horse. Early matches, bless their earnest hearts, lacked any true formation in the modern sense. If one were to squint, really squint, through the sepia-toned haze of history, and attempt a description, the player arrangement might be characterized as something bordering on the utterly delightful, perhaps a 1-1-8, or maybe, on an adventurous day, a 1-7. Imagine that. A lone goalkeeper, often a man of immense fortitude, standing guard like a lighthouse in a storm. Perhaps one, just one, solitary defender, 1 or 2 midfielders, vaguely attempting to create some semblance of order in the grand melee. And then, the magnificent, bewildering spectacle of a staggering 7 or 8 players, dedicated solely to attacking the opponent's goal. It was, quite frankly, like trying to herd an enthusiastic swarm of bees. This aggressive, dribble-first mindset wasn't born of tactical genius, mind. It was partly a symptom of the rudimentary offside rule of the era, which initially prohibited forward passes. If you couldn't pass it forward, well, then individual ball carrying became the primary means of progression across the vast, often waterlogged expanse of the pitch. The very idea of a defensive midfielder, that was still generations away, a concept as alien as flying cars or talking dogs. This journey, then, will gently unfold the layers of strategic thought that have transformed the beautiful game from its earliest, almost accidental patterns, like the frost on a window pane forming intricate designs, to the sophisticated, often baffling systems of today. We will explore how simple rule changes, how the visionary dreams of managers, and indeed, the sheer, boundless ingenuity of players, shaped the ebb and flow of football, creating, piece by patient piece, the captivating spectacle we cherish today. So breathe in, breathe out, and let the whispers of football's past carry you gently into the quiet. from mob rule to method. For a long, long time, football wasn't really a game of minds. It was a game of sturdy boots and even sturdier bladders. A beautiful, chaotic surge, like a determined flock of pigeons chasing a dropped chip. A glorious, muddy ballet performed largely by men with excellent beards and an unshakable belief that simply running more would eventually solve all life's great problems, including how to get a ball into a net. Imagine it. Early Victorian England, the sort of place where steam engines were still considered a marvel, and a good strong brew was a viable medical treatment for most ailments. Football, in its infancy, was barely distinguishable from a boisterous riot. Whole villages, entire workforces, kicking a pig's bladder from one parish boundary to another. No real positions, no grand tactical pronouncements. Just a vast heaving scrum, a sort of human tumble dryer, all arms and legs and optimistic shouts. It was, in its purest form, football as a primal scream, an athletic expression of pure, untrammeled will. The ball, you see, was merely a reluctant co-conspirator, often lost beneath a pile of tweed and industrial resolve, and yet, even amidst that delightful anarchic soup, the first tiny seeds of order began to sprout, like a stubborn dandelion pushing through a crack in the pavement. There were whispers, murmurings, in the smoke-filled backrooms of industrial towns, of putting a chap here and another chap there. Not quite a grand strategy, you understand, more an early form of controlled bewilderment, a recognition that perhaps, just perhaps, not everyone needed to chase the same piece of leather at the exact same time. It was a philosophy as profound, in its own quiet way, as discovering that a tea towel could, in fact, be folded. The very first tactical breakthrough was simply the idea that one might stand still, or at least relatively still, a truly revolutionary thought in a world obsessed with movement. A world that, ironically, would soon come to worship movement above all else, the Cambridge rules and the Sheffield innovations. Now, as the 19th century rolled ponderously onwards, much like a heavily laden coal wagon trundling down a cobbled lane, things started to solidify. And as with many things that need solidifying, it often happened in Cambridge, a place, one might argue, where the very air is thick with the scent of quiet academic endeavour, and perhaps the faintest whiff of pipe smoke and damp tweed. The Cambridge rules, formulated around 1848, were one of the first serious attempts to nail down what this football thing actually was. They were less about grand tactical visions, and more about, well, basic politeness on the pitch. No hacking, no carrying the ball. Revolutionary stuff. If you'd spent your weekends being mercilessly throttled by a burly mill worker in pursuit of a spherical object, it was, if you like, the moment football decided to put on a tie and try to behave itself in polite company. A truly surreal metaphor for the game's nascent sense of decorum, a cat having brought home a dead pigeon, suddenly remembering its manners and offering you a timid blood-stained paw. But it was up in Sheffield, gritty, industrial Sheffield, where the game began to truly flex its creative muscles. The Sheffield rules, born a little later, introduced the idea of, well, fewer players. Imagine that. Reducing the mob. It sounds almost sacrilegious, doesn't it? Like telling a fisherman he can only use one net. But it was a masterstroke. Fewer players meant more space. More space meant more thinking. And that, dear listener, is where the real mischief began. This move from a sprawling, formless mass to something more structured, more intimate, meant that individual skill could start to shine through. No longer was it just about brute force and a decent pair of calves. Now, a man with a bit of a shimmy, a chap who could actually pass the ball, well, he might just become important. It was the first subtle hint that football might not just be a test of endurance, but a chess match played out on a vast, muddy board. A quiet, unassuming revolution, much like discovering that a cup of tea tastes rather better with milk. A simple addition, but one that changed everything. Not to get too profound on you, but here's a thought worth brewing, like steam rising from a chipped mug of tea. To move forward, sometimes you have to take something away. In that early chaos, less didn't just mean less, it meant more. More space, more time, more possibility. Football, like life, began to realize that subtraction could be a kind of genius. Chapter 1: The Scottish Thread. Passing is born. The game was beginning to find its feet, to discover that simply running headlong into a human wall wasn't always the most efficient strategy. And as with many clever ideas in football, this next one, this fundamental shift, drifted south, carried on the winds of change, and perhaps a faint scent of heather and distant bagpipes from the rugged pitches of Scotland, while the English clubs, bless their muscular, dribbling hearts, were still largely obsessed with the individual charge, with a single brave soul attempting to single-handedly breach the ramparts of the opposing defense. Something rather different was brewing north of the border. It was a quieter revolution, born not of brute force, but of subtle understanding. The Scottish clubs, you see, began to introduce a peculiar notion. The passing game. This wasn't some grand tactical manifesto, scribbled on a napkin in a Glasgow pub. It was a more organic evolution, born from the practicalities of a less physical, more artful approach to the game. Imagine it, instead of one man battling against five, a sequence of swift, intelligent touches, moving the ball from one player to another, drawing defenders out of position like a nervous sheepdog trying to herd a flock of disobedient geese. It was less about dazzling individual flair and more about collective cunning. This was the moment football began to understand the power of the collective, the elegant dance of shared responsibility. Before this, the ball often resembled a prized conker, fiercely guarded and only reluctantly relinquished. Now, it became a shared secret, passed conspiratorially between teammates. Each touch a whispered instruction. This newfound communal spirit on the pitch was a revelation, transforming the muddy melee into something resembling a choreographed ballet, albeit one still prone to spectacular pratfalls and unexpected mudslides. And from this idea, this simple yet profound act of giving the ball to a teammate, a shape began to emerge. The 2-3-5 pyramid. This formation, a true marvel of its time, saw two fullbacks guarding the goal with a newfound discipline, no longer merely part of the chasing pack. These early defenders, often hardy souls with calves like tree trunks, were tasked with the unenviable job of being the last line of defense before the goalkeeper, sweeping up the remnants of thwarted attacks, then three half-backs stretching across the midfield, becoming the arteries and veins of the team, linking defense to attack. These half-backs were the engines, the unsung heroes who started to dictate the rhythm of the game, intercepting passes and distributing the ball with an eye for opportunity. They were the first real strategists on the pitch, thinking beyond the immediate tackle, considering the next 2 or 3 passes, and finally, a formidable line of 5 forwards, poised to strike. But now, crucially, working in concert, not merely as solo virtuosos. These 5 attackers, 2 outside forwards, 2 inside forwards, and a lone centre forward, formed a fearsome attacking machine. The outside forwards would hug the touchlines, stretching the opposition's defense thin, while the inside forwards would dart into gaps created by the center forwards' movement, often exchanging quick, intricate passes. The center forward, no longer just a blunt instrument, became a pivot, a focal point for the delicate triangles and squares that the passing game began to weave. It was, for its era, an almost futuristic concept, a recognition that defense wasn't just about the lone sentinel, but a staggered line. That midfield wasn't just a place to sprint through, but a hub of distribution. The ball was now a shuttlecock in a sophisticated game of badminton rather than a battering ram. It was a carefully constructed jigsaw puzzle where each piece, however small, had a vital role in completing the picture. A delicate tapestry woven with boots and leather. This new way of playing, this passing philosophy, soon proved devastatingly effective. Inevitably, it found its way south. Think of Preston North End, that grand old club from Lancashire, often simply known as the Invincibles. They weren't dominating football in the late 1880s through sheer individual brilliance, though they had their share of talents like John Goodall and Fred Dewhurst. No, they became the original Invincibles, conquering all before them in the inaugural Football League season of 1888-89, precisely because they embraced this new Scottish wisdom. They relied on teamwork. Through the relentless, almost hypnotic rhythm of their passing, they dismantled opponents who were still stuck in the old ways. They understood that the whole could be greater than the sum of its parts, a concept that now seems obvious but was utterly revolutionary then. They moved the ball with an almost uncanny understanding, their players interlinking like gears in a well-oiled clock, not simply relying on one star to carry the entire mechanism. This cooperative spirit allowed them to unlock defenses that had previously only known how to deal with a head-on charge, leaving their opponents often bewildered and chasing shadows. It was a masterclass in elegant efficiency, a gentle but firm rebuke to the notion that football was merely about individual heroics. It's worth noting, with a gentle smile, that the English defenders, initially, were quite baffled by all this Scottish intricacy. There's a wonderful, almost apocryphal tale of them mocking the Scots for passing too much. Imagine this scene: a burly English centre-half, hands on hips, bellowing across a muddy pitch. "Why don't you just run with the thing? What's all this delicate tapping about?" They saw it as a weakness, a lack of directness, a fiddly bit of nonsense that would surely amount to nothing. They'd spent their careers wresting the ball from opponents, treating it like a personal possession to be fiercely guarded. The idea of voluntarily relinquishing it, only to receive it back moments later, must have seemed like a bizarre parlor trick, or perhaps a coded signal for tea break. It was like trying to explain the subtle art of impressionist painting to a bewildered stonemason. The irony, of course, is that this very weakness would become the bedrock of all future tactical development. A quiet revolution, built one gentle pass at a time. And as the evening deepens, we can reflect that sometimes the greatest advancements come not from brute force, but from the elegant simplicity of sharing. The ball, you see, much like a good story, is always better when it's passed along. And with that thought, perhaps you can let your mind drift, gently, like a well-executed through ball, into the realm of quiet slumber. Chapter 2: The WM Formation. Chapman's Arsenal Blueprint. As the football world turned, slowly, like a grand old Ferris wheel creaking into motion, a seismic shift occurred, not on a muddy pitch, but in the sterile halls of lawmakers. The year was 1925, and the offside law was changed. Before this, you needed 3 opponents between an attacker and the goal to be onside. It was a rule that choked attacking play, forcing forwards to linger deep, creating a perpetually cramped final third. But in 1925, that number was reduced to just 2. A seemingly small alteration, yet its ripple effect would transform the very fabric of the game. It was like subtly adjusting the gears in a grandfather clock. Suddenly, the whole mechanism could run with new speed and purpose. This new rule, while intended to open up the game, initially threw defenses into disarray. Forwards, now freed from their previous shackles, could lurk much closer to goal, causing widespread panic. Teams accustomed to their sturdy, flat backlines found themselves exposed, like a scarecrow in a sudden gale. Goals, previously a hard-won commodity, began to fly in with alarming regularity, and scorelines ballooned to almost comical proportions. It was a brief, delightful period of chaos for the attacking player, but a waking nightmare for defenders, who looked on with the sort of bewildered terror usually reserved for a man who's just seen his own dog driving a bus. Into this tactical vacuum stepped a figure of almost mythical stature, Herbert Chapman, a man of quiet intensity and forensic attention to detail. Chapman was then managing Huddersfield Town before his legendary tenure at Arsenal. He was less a football manager and more a meticulous engineer, constantly tinkering, forever seeking efficiency. He observed the unfolding chaos, the glut of goals, and understood that merely adding another defender to the existing 2 wouldn't solve the problem. That would just create a slightly denser, but equally vulnerable wall. He needed to think differently. He needed to create a system that absorbed the new attacking threat, while still allowing his own team to exploit the revised offside rule. Chapman's stroke of genius was to drop his centre-half, the central player in the midfield 3 of the old 2-3-5, back into the defence. This created a 3-man defence, turning the existing 2 fullbacks into wider, more traditional defenders, while the new central man provided crucial cover and intercepted passes that now flew through the middle. To compensate for this withdrawal from midfield, the 2 inside forwards were pulled back slightly deeper into midfield. The result was the symmetrical, perfectly balanced 3-2-2-3 formation, which, when drawn on a blackboard, looked uncannily like the letters W and M merged together. This was the birth of the WM. The W was formed by the 5 attacking players, the 2 wide wingers, the 2 deeper inside forwards, and the central striker. The M was formed by the 5 defensive players, the 3 central defenders, the new centre-half and the 2 fullbacks and the 2 wing halves, the wider midfielders. It was a beautiful, almost industrial solution to a complex problem. The central halfback, now essentially a 3rd defender, became a crucial pivot, responsible for man-marking the opposition's centre-forward and sweeping up through balls. This was not yet the elegant, deep-lying playmaker we would see later, but a robust, unyielding shield, like a well-placed boulder in a fast-flowing river. Chapman brought this meticulously designed blueprint to Arsenal in 1925, and it was there that the WM truly flourished, becoming their defining tactical signature. Under his visionary leadership, Arsenal transformed from a middling London club into the dominant force in English football. They won their first major trophy, the FA Cup, in 1930, followed by 5 First Division titles in the 1930s. Their success wasn't just about winning, it was about the way they won. They played with a precision and solidity that baffled opponents. The WM provided defensive stability, allowing the fullbacks to push forward when appropriate, and crucially, it created a diamond shape in midfield, giving the 2 pulled back inside forwards, often the most creative players, the space and time to orchestrate attacks. It was like watching a well-drilled army, each unit knowing its precise role, moving in perfect synchronicity. Chapman's obsession with detail was legendary, bordering on the eccentric. He was a man who believed that perfection lay in the minutiae. It's said he would spend hours poring over tactics, sometimes even using a magnifying glass on diagrams, as if trying to locate an elusive dust bunny in the grand scheme of things. His dedication extended beyond formations. He famously painted the ball white to make it more visible in poor weather and at night, a revolutionary idea for the time. He also insisted that players wear numbered shirts, a move initially met with suspicion and even ridicule, but which soon became standard practice, making it easier for spectators and, more importantly, for his meticulously planned tactical instructions to be understood. He was a pioneer in nutrition and fitness, understanding that a fit body was as crucial as a sharp mind. Chapman was a footballing alchemist, turning raw talent and chaotic energy into gold. The success of Chapman's arsenal, built on the foundations of the WM, sent ripples across Britain. Other teams, initially skeptical, soon began to adopt variations of the system. If you wanted to compete, you had to understand the WM. You had to learn its rhythms, its strengths, and its few, subtle weaknesses. It became the default formation for decades, the standard blueprint for football success. It was the age of the WM, a testament to the power of a single, brilliant mind to reshape an entire sport. And as the echoes of Chapman's strategic genius fade into the quiet, we can perhaps reflect on how the smallest change in a rule can lead to the greatest leap in human ingenuity. Sometimes, a simple reduction from 3 men to 2 can spark a revolution. Chapter 3: Italy Thinks Deep. As the tactical pendulum swung in Britain, finding its equilibrium in the solid, symmetrical lines of the WM across the Channel, on the sun-drenched, often dusty pitches of Italy, another visionary was at work, adding his own layer of thought to the unfolding tapestry of football. Vittorio Pozzo, a man of profound intellect and military precision, was the architect of Italy's national team, and he possessed a mind that delved deeper than formations into the very philosophy of play. He was less a football coach and more a professor of human chess, meticulously studying every move and counter-move. Pozzo admired the WM's solidity, its balance, but he saw an opportunity for refinement, a way to inject more strategic nuance, a dash of Italian flair into the pragmatic British design. His system, known as the metodo, was in essence a tweaked 2-3-2-3. On paper, it might look similar to the pyramid, or even a variation of the WM, but the subtle, almost imperceptible difference lay in the heart of his midfield. He pulled 2 of his halfbacks slightly wider, creating more space centrally. This space was then occupied by a unique player, a true innovator, the centro mediano metodista, the deep-lying playmaker. This was a position of profound importance, a tactical innovation that would reverberate through football for generations. The metodista was not merely a destructive force, like Chapman's defensive centre-half, who primarily marked. No, the metodista was a thinking player, positioned deep between the defence and the midfield, orchestrating play from behind. He was the conductor of the orchestra, the man who read the game, intercepted passes, distributed the ball with precise long and short passes, and launched attacks from deep positions. He was the first true link between defense and attack in a creative sense, a strategic anchor who could both win the ball and then dictate the rhythm and direction of the team's forward movements. It was like introducing a highly intelligent owl into a flock of pigeons. Suddenly, there was a sense of higher purpose, a watchful eye guiding the entire operation. This wasn't just about stopping the opponent, it was about starting your own symphony. This metodista was the first true defensive midfielder as we understand the role today. A player who not only shielded the defense, but also initiated offensive patterns. Luis Monti, a formidable player who represented both Argentina and Italy, epitomized this role for Pozzo. A man of immense physical presence, combined with surprising vision. His ability to break up play and then immediately launch devastating counterattacks was central to Italy's success. It was a role that required both the brawn of a traditional stopper and the brains of a pass master, a delightful contradiction. On the pitch, this blend of attributes allowed Pozzo's teams to transition from defense to attack with an unsettling speed, catching opponents off guard as if a quiet stream suddenly transformed into a rushing river. Pozzo's metodo, with its central tenet of the deep-lying playmaker, proved to be an overwhelming success on the grandest stage of all. Under his astute guidance, Italy won the World Cup in 1934 on home soil. And then, remarkably, they defended their title in 1938 in France. This achievement, consecutive World Cup victories, was unprecedented and cemented Pozzo's legacy as one of football's greatest tactical minds. His teams were known for their physical strength, their defensive solidity, but crucially, for their clinical efficiency in attack, often breaking quickly and incisively through the channels created by the metodista's distribution. They were less about relentless pressure and more about surgical strikes, a coiled spring waiting for the perfect moment to release its energy. The success of the metodo wasn't just about the formation. It was about Pozzo's meticulous preparation, his psychological insights, and his ability to scout and select players who perfectly fit his exacting requirements. He treated his players with a paternalistic authority, demanding discipline and dedication, fostering a strong team spirit that bordered on military camaraderie. He would spend hours, we are told, observing players, not just their physical attributes, but their mental fortitude, their capacity for understanding complex instructions. He was a general on the training ground, meticulously planning every skirmish. He believed in the power of the mind as much as the strength of the leg. His deep analysis of opponents, combined with his unwavering belief in his system, gave his players a clear purpose, a defined role within the collective. It was a testament to the idea that true strength comes not just from individual prowess, but from a unified, intelligent machine. The metodo stood in fascinating contrast to the WM, while Chapman's system offered rigid balance. Vittorio Pozzo provided a more fluid intelligence, an axis around which the team revolved. It showed that controlling the central areas, not just defensively but creatively, was paramount. It proved that a single player, intelligently positioned and with the right attributes, could exert immense influence over the entire flow of a match, and as the gentle hum of history settles around us, we can appreciate how these distinct approaches, born from different cultures and different tactical needs, both contributed profoundly to the game's ongoing evolution. The seed of the modern defensive midfielder, the man who shields and creates, was sown, ready to grow into the complex, vital role we see today. It highlights that football, much like life, is a constant process of adaptation and refinement, where every new idea builds upon the shoulders of those that came before. And with that thought, perhaps you can let your mind drift, gently, like a perfectly weighted pass, into the quiet of the night. Sidebar: Forgotten Geniuses, Matthias Sindelar, the paperman of Austria's wonder team. Not every great leap in football comes from chalkboards or clipboards. Now and then, Someone drifts across the pitch who seems to bend the game simply by playing it on their own terms. And as tactical systems hardened into grid-like precision under Chapman and Pazzo, one figure danced quietly through the gaps. A man too slight to bully, too clever to catch. Matthias Zindler, Austria's paperman. They called him that because of his frame, slim, almost fragile, like he might blow away in a strong wind. But on the pitch, he moved with a grace that made the muddiest of grounds feel like parquet floors. He didn't run so much as glide. Opponents were left swiping at memories, while Sindelar twisted past them with a feint so subtle it seemed to happen after he'd already gone. Austria's wonder team of the early 1930s, coached by the thoughtful Hugo Meisel, played a style many saw as continental pyramid football, but refined. Not rigid lines and hard edges, but something more fluid, intuitive. And Sindelar was its soul. A conductor with boots on, whispering suggestions to his teammates, inviting the ball into clever spaces like a host who knows exactly when to top up your glass. He scored goals, many, in fact. But it wasn't really about that. His genius lay in how he made football feel like something weightless, the kind of player who could pause in a crowd and still find silence. A sculptor coaxing beauty from a moving ball. But like so many artists of that era, his canvas was darkening. In 1938, the Anschluss swallowed Austria into Nazi Germany. The national team was dissolved overnight. In its place, a unification match, staged as a grand performance of new unity between Austria and Germany. The crowd expected decorum. The regime expected obedience. Sindelar, the captain, delivered something else. He danced, he dribbled, he tormented the German defense, scoring a goal and orchestrating an unexpected 2-0 victory for the Austrian side. After the goal, he performed a mocking, twirling dance in front of the Nazi officials, a defiant act of resistance against the suffocating ideology. Afterward, he declined an invitation to join the new German team. He cited injury, but no one believed it. It was a refusal, silent but unflinching, and widely understood to be a profound political statement. His resistance to fascism, expressed through the very game he loved, was a testament to his character. He was a man who understood that even in the face of overwhelming power, there was dignity in standing firm, in preserving one's spirit. And then, in January 1939, he was gone, found dead in his Vienna flat alongside his girlfriend, the cause officially chalked up to carbon monoxide poisoning. An accident, they said. Or maybe not. Speculation swirled. Suicide, foul play, quiet murder. The truth never surfaced. What remains is the myth, and more importantly, the memory, that of a man who turned football into art, and art into protest. A man who, in a world tightening its grip, played with open arms, who refused, in his final public act, to bow, as the shadows lengthen and the echoes soften. Let us carry that whisper forward, not just of a player, but of a principle, that in football, as in life, grace under pressure is its own kind of resistance. And now, let us drift to warmer skies, where football wore a brighter smile, a place where the ball moved, not just with purpose, but with joy. Chapter 4: Brazilian Fluidity, the Magic of 4-2-4. As Europe wrestled with the structured certainties of the WM and the subtle intelligence of the Metodo across the Atlantic, in the sun-drenched stadiums of Brazil, a different kind of football was brewing. It was a game born of beaches and samba, of natural rhythm and individual expression. For decades, Brazil had been a footballing nation of immense raw talent, yet for all their flair, World Cup success had remained elusive. They had the soloists, but perhaps not yet the symphony. That, however, was about to change. The breakthrough came with the emergence of the 4-2-4 formation, a tactical innovation that perfectly encapsulated the Brazilian spirit and unlocked their prodigious talents. While the WM focused on central solidity, the 4-2-4 embraced width and attacking verve. It achieved this by withdrawing two of the traditional five forwards into deeper midfield roles, creating a more compact and mobile central unit. This left a front line of four, often two central strikers and two wide attackers, stretching the opponent's defense to breaking point. Behind them, two central midfielders, sometimes called volantes, provided a crucial pivot, linking defense to attack and initiating the waves of intricate passing movements that became their hallmark. This arrangement was like loosening the ties on a formal suit, allowing for more natural movement, more effortless grace. The two Brazilian sides that truly defined this era, and indeed football history, were the World Cup winners of 1958 and 1970. These teams didn't just win, they dazzled. They played football with an infectious joy, a spontaneous creativity that felt almost improvised, yet was underpinned by this ingenious tactical framework. The 1958 team in Sweden, with its blend of youthful exuberance and seasoned wisdom, was the first to truly unleash the 4-2-4 on the world. Its success owed much to the brilliance of individuals like the teenage Pelé, a phenomenon of staggering talent, and the incomparable Garrincha, a winger whose every movement was an act of delightful deception. Didi, the elegant central midfielder, was the architect, pulling the strings with his intelligent distribution and folha seca, dry leaf free kicks, which dipped and swerved in the air. This was football as pure poetry, a cascade of rapid passes and daring runs. But it was the 1970 Brazil side in Mexico that truly elevated the 4-2-4 to an art form. This team is widely considered one of the greatest of all time, a constellation of stars playing a brand of football that seemed almost divine. They exemplified the very essence of wide play, with their wingers hugging the touchlines, constantly looking to receive the ball and drive at defenders. Crucially, they introduced the concept of overlapping fullbacks who were not merely defensive stalwarts but integral parts of the attack, surging forward to provide an extra dimension of width and surprise. Carlos Alberto's iconic goal in the final against Italy, often cited as one of the greatest team goals ever scored, was a perfect illustration of this, a sweeping move from deep, culminating in a devastating overlap and a thunderous finish. At the heart of this Brazilian magic were the two deep creators in midfield, players like Didi in 1958, and later the majestic Gerson in 1970. These were not simply holding midfielders, they were the orchestrators, the deep-lying generals who possessed the vision to pick out passes that others couldn't even imagine. They had the ability to switch play, to thread intricate balls through the tightest defenses, and to control the tempo of the game with a deceptive effortlessness. They allowed the likes of Pelé, Jairzinho, Rivellino and Tostão to weave their magic further up the pitch, knowing that the engine room was purring smoothly behind them. It was here, in this fertile midfield, that the idea was truly forged. Midfield becomes a springboard for joy. It wasn't just about winning possession, it was about transforming it into an immediate, exhilarating attacking opportunity. There's a touching anecdote about Pelé from the 1958 World Cup. Before the final against Sweden, the young prodigy, just 17 years old, was overwhelmed by the moment. He was seen crying before the final, the immense pressure of a nation resting on his slender shoulders. Yet, once the whistle blew, the tears vanished, replaced by a performance of audacious brilliance, culminating in a famous goal that saw him flick the ball over a defender before volleying it home. And after Brazil secured their first World Cup title, the tears were of pure elation. He danced after it, a joyful, uninhibited celebration that captured the very essence of Brazilian football, a game to be played with a smile, a shimmy, and a heart full of rhythm. The Brazilian 4-2-4 and the glorious teams that played it showed the world that football could be both devastatingly effective and breathtakingly beautiful. It proved that attacking flair, when built upon a sound, if fluid, tactical foundation, could conquer all. It was a golden age, a period when the very concept of football seemed to expand, becoming more colourful, more expressive. And as the echoes of those joyful Brazilian screams fade into the night, we can reflect on how the deepest roots of joy in the game are often found in the freedom to create, to express, to dance with the ball. A truly beautiful thought to drift off with. As the rhythm of Brazilian joy begins to fade, let's pause for a moment to remember another brilliant, though perhaps less joyful chapter in football's tactical history before we turn our gaze back to Italy, where defense became an art form. Sidebar: Forgotten Geniuses, Number 2, Hungary's Magical Magyars. Hidekuti invents the false nine. Just as the world was beginning to truly appreciate the attacking symphony of Brazilian football, another tactical revolution was taking place in a small, landlocked European nation. While Brazil danced and dazzled in sunshine, behind the clouds and Iron Curtain, a quieter kind of magic took shape. It spoke not in samba rhythms, but in misdirection and geometric mischief. Hungary's Magical Magyars, they called them, a side that didn't just play football. They redefined it. And at the center of their soft little revolution was a man who seemed almost too ordinary for the role Nandor. Hidekuti, no tattoos, no fanfare, but with a single sideways step, he helped invent a position that would shape football's next 70 years, the false nine. Most teams in the early 1950s still clung tightly to the WM, a formation built around structure, predictability, and a big lad up front. The centre forward was there to occupy the defender, to be kicked and to kick back. But Hungary's coach, Gustav Sebs, wasn't interested in collisions. He was thinking in triangles and traps. So he told Hidekuti to drift, to drop deep, to step away from the traditional battle and instead become a question. The result was confusion. Imagine a centre-half who spent his life guarding a tree, only to find the tree has sprouted legs and wandered off into the neighbour's garden. Space opened up, great yawning gaps, into which Puskas, Kochis, and Chibor poured like liquid lightning. They were like a pack of wolves, suddenly finding an open gate to the sheepfold. Hidekuti wasn't a striker anymore. He wasn't quite a midfielder either. He was something else, a phantom between the lines, never where you expected, always where it hurt. He was the master key, unlocking defenses with his intelligent movement and exceptional passing range, orchestrating attacks from a position where he was neither strictly a midfielder nor a conventional forward. He was a ghost in the machine, a delightful anomaly. The impact of this tactical innovation was stark, and nowhere was it more dramatically demonstrated than in the now legendary match at Wembley in 1953, England. The self-proclaimed masters of football, undefeated at home against continental opposition, hosted the Magical Magyars. They arrived with a confidence bordering on arrogance, secure in their belief that the WM formation and their robust style of play were simply superior. What followed was a footballing humiliation of epic proportions. England were humiliated at Wembley in 1953, suffering a staggering 6-3 defeat. The English players and coaching staff simply couldn't comprehend what was happening. Their central defender, Billy Wright, accustomed to engaging in physical duels with traditional strikers, found himself chasing shadows as Hidekuti drifted away, creating chaos and space for Hungary's relentless forwards. It was a public dismantling of the established order. Hungary passed the ball with dazzling speed and precision, their players interchanging positions with a fluidity that was utterly alien to their English counterparts. The scoreline was a brutal lesson, a thunderclap in the complacent world of English football. This match wasn't just a defeat. It was a revelation. It forced English football to look inward, to question its deeply ingrained assumptions. It showed that formations weren't static blueprints, but dynamic frameworks, and it firmly established the genius of Siebes and the brilliance of Hidekuti, who, by simply not doing what was expected of him, exposed the limitations of an entire tactical philosophy. The false nine, born out of this Hungarian ingenuity, would reappear in various guises throughout football history, a recurring testament to the power of deception and intelligent movement. A truly groundbreaking idea, quietly introduced, but profoundly impactful. And now, as the echo of Hungarian ingenuity softens in the memory, we drift once more back to Italy. Not to dance or dazzle, but to defend. If Brazil was a party and Hungary a puzzle, then Italy, in the decades to come, would become something else entirely. A quiet masterclass in saying no. Chapter 5. Catenaccio, the art of the lock after the Second World War. As Europe slowly rebuilt itself, football in Italy began to revert to type. Not the free-flowing, creative metodo of Pazzo, but something altogether more pragmatic, more defensive, almost an instinctive retreat into a shell. The word itself, Catenaccio, means doorbolt or chain, and it perfectly describes the system's core philosophy: to lock down the opponent, to deny them space, and to suffocate their attack with ruthless efficiency. It was football played with a steely glint in the eye, where a 1-0 victory was a masterpiece, and a 0-0 draw a moral triumph. This wasn't just a defensive strategy. It was a mindset, a cultural expression of Italian pragmatism and caution. It emphasized tight man marking, where each defender was assigned a direct opponent and stuck to them like glue, a shadow rarely shaken. But the true innovation, the very essence of Catenaccio, lay in the introduction of a revolutionary defensive role. The libero, or sweeper, was not involved in man marking. Instead, he played behind the main defensive line, a free man, untethered to a specific opponent. His job was to sweep up any through balls that bypassed the man markers, to cover for any defensive errors, and to generally provide an extra layer of protection. Like a vigilant night watchman ensuring all doors were securely bolted, he was the ultimate insurance policy, the last bastion before the goalkeeper, giving the defenders ahead of him the confidence to stick relentlessly to their men. This created a profound tactical imbalance for attacking teams who suddenly found their direct runs swallowed up by multiple layers of defense. It was like trying to navigate a thorny hedge maze, only to find another, even thornier hedge behind every turn, while Catenaccio had its roots in the Swiss Verrou bolt system of Karl Rappan in the 1930s. Its most famous and devastating exponent was the Argentine coach Helenio Herrera, who managed Inter Milan in the 1960s. Herrera, a flamboyant and authoritarian figure known as the Magician, took Catenaccio and refined it into an almost impregnable fortress. His Inter side became synonymous with ruthless efficiency and counter-attacking brilliance. They were despised by purists for their negative football, but undeniably effective, a machine built for winning. Herrera's Inter played a 5-3-2 or 1-4-3-2, depending on how you viewed the libero. But the real magic was in the execution. They would allow opponents to dominate possession, inviting them forward, patiently absorbing pressure. Then, with a sudden, devastating burst of speed and precision, they would launch lightning-fast counterattacks, often through the pace of players like Jair and Sandro Mazzola. It was like a coiled cobra, waiting patiently before striking with lethal accuracy. Their defensive discipline was absolute, drilled into them through relentless training. Herrera's methods were legendary, and often brutal. He imposed an iron discipline on his players, controlling their diets, their movements, even their leisure time. He famously used psychology, posting motivational slogans in the dressing room, and he demanded an almost pathological commitment to the defensive phase. There's a famous anecdote about Herrera's training methods. His players would often train without the ball. Why? Because, as Herrera would famously proclaim, the ball was the enemy's problem. His defenders were drilled in positioning, in covering, in marking, in the art of nullifying the opponent, as if the ball itself was a contagious disease they were trying to avoid. They practiced defensive drills until they became second nature, until their movements were as synchronized as a flock of migratory birds. This wasn't just physical training, it was mental conditioning, instilling a deep-seated belief that preventing the opponent from scoring was the ultimate act of footballing prowess. Inter's dominance under Herrera was absolute. They won back-to-back European Cups in 1964 and 1965, along with multiple Serie A titles. Their style might not have been beautiful to watch for everyone, but it was undeniably effective. Catenaccio proved that defense could indeed be the best form of attack, that control and discipline could triumph over unbridled creativity. It was a stark reminder that football is a game of balances, a constant negotiation between risk and reward, and as the distant echoes of Inter's defensive brilliance fade, perhaps you can let your mind drift gently, like a perfectly executed tackle, into the calm of a restful sleep. Chapter 6. England's Wingless Wonders. As the 1960s spun their colourful, often chaotic web across the world, football too was in a state of flux. The defensive might of Catenaccio had shown that preventing goals could be a potent strategy. But the world was still captivated by the attacking verve of Brazil. In England, a nation often set in its ways, a quiet tactical revolution was brewing under the calm, almost unflappable gaze of Alf Ramsey. Ramsey, a former fullback and a man of immense self-belief, had a vision for his England team that flew in the face of decades of English footballing tradition. The very idea of an England team without wingers was, for many, an affront, a heresy almost. English football was built on the pace and trickery of its wide men, those dashing figures who hugged the touchline and swung in crosses. But Ramsey, with a quiet stubbornness that bordered on prescience, believed that traditional wingers were a luxury, a waste of talent against the increasingly organized defenses of continental Europe. They were, in his eyes, often isolated, predictable, and ultimately inefficient. He famously declared that England would win the World Cup without them. And so, he decided to ditch wingers and build centrally. His tactical blueprint, often described as a 4-1-3-2 or a narrow 4-4-2 diamond, was a bold departure. It traded the traditional width for a packed, intelligent midfield, allowing England to control the central areas of the pitch, stifling opponents and launching attacks through the middle. The back four provided a solid foundation, while the midfield was a fluid, hard-working unit. At the apex of this diamond, or just behind the two central strikers, was the elegant, long-striding genius of Bobby Charlton, whose thunderous shots and incisive passes were the cutting edge of England's attack. Charlton, given the freedom to roam and connect play, was the creative heartbeat, the man who could unlock the tightest defenses with a moment of individual brilliance. He was the diamond's glint, drawing all eyes to him. But the true, unsung hero, the man who anchored this system and allowed the creative talents to flourish, was Nobby Stiles. Stiles was not a player of sublime grace or effortless artistry. He was a force of nature, a bundle of relentless energy and uncompromising commitment. His role, the single defensive midfielder just in front of the back four, was to break up play, to win the ball back, and to do so with a brutal, unflinching efficiency. He was the ultimate destroyer, a tenacious terrier who harried opponents, intercepting passes and snapping into tackles with a ferocity that could make even the bravest attacker think twice. It was a role that required immense discipline and boundless stamina. A true defensive pivot. Here we see the evolution of the deep-line midfielder. Pazos Metodista was a creator as much as a destroyer. Stiles, however, embodied the pure destroyer role. He wasn't there to launch 60-yard passes. He was there to prevent the opposition from even thinking about making a 60-yard pass. He was the bolt on the door, but a bolt that could chase you down the corridor. He was the unwavering anchor in the heart of the storm, ensuring that no opponent could find comfort or space in England's central midfield. His relentless work allowed players like Bobby Charlton to focus on their attacking duties, knowing that the midfield was safe and secure behind them. The culmination of Ramsey's bold experiment came in the summer of 1966. On home soil, England, unfancied by many, marched to the World Cup final, overcoming formidable opponents with their disciplined, resilient, and utterly central style. The final, against West Germany at Wembley, was a titanic struggle, ending in a famous 4-2 victory after extra time. It was a triumph of tactical discipline, of collective grit, and of a system designed to exploit the strengths of its players while negating the weaknesses of others. Ramsey's wingless wonders proved that a pragmatic, well-drilled approach, even one that challenged deeply held footballing beliefs, could lead to the ultimate glory. The image of Nobby Stiles dancing on the Wembley turf after the final whistle, his missing front teeth adding to his endearing, almost pugnacious charm, remains an enduring symbol of that victory, a testament to the power of the unsung hero. England's success with the 4-1-3-2 wasn't just a fleeting triumph. It influenced tactical thinking for years to come, particularly in Britain. It showed that central control, a compact midfield, and defensive solidity were indeed viable paths to success, even if they sometimes sacrificed traditional width and individual flamboyance. It laid the groundwork for future narrow formations, and cemented the importance of a true defensive screen in front of the back line. As England stuck to shape and solidity, a revolution began in Amsterdam, a concept so fluid, so mesmerizing, it would turn football on its head. A new dawn of movement and interchanging roles was about to break, far from the rigid lines of Wembley. Let your mind drift to the canals, the bicycles, and the bold, innovative spirit of a new era. We've journeyed through the solid lines of English pragmatism, where every player had a defined role and the ball was the enemy's problem until it was ours. But as the 1960s gave way to the 1970s, a new breeze, fresh and invigorating, began to blow across the footballing landscape, originating from the flat, low-lying lands of the Netherlands. It was a philosophy so radical, so breathtakingly fluid, that it felt less like a tactical system and more like a work of abstract art. This was total football, and it was about to change everything. Chapter 7. Total Football. Previous tactical evolutions were about defining roles and positions with increasing precision. Total football was about dissolving those boundaries, about making every player capable of playing, in any position, at any given moment. It was a concept so profoundly simple, yet so fiendishly difficult to execute that it seemed to defy the very laws of footballing gravity. At its heart were two towering figures, the brilliant cerebral coach, Rinus Michels, and his on-field embodiment, the mercurial genius, Johann Cruyff. They didn't just tweak a formation, they fundamentally reinvented movement and positioning. Michels first at Ajax, and then with the Dutch national team, famously took the static 4-3-3 formation and injected it with a kinetic, almost restless energy. The key tenet was positional interchange. Defenders could become attackers, attackers could drop deep into midfield, and midfielders would surge forward, their roles fluid and interchangeable as water flowing through a stream. It was a delightful chaos, but a chaos born of meticulous planning and relentless drilling. Every player had to understand not just their own role, but the role of every other player on the pitch, and be ready to step into it at a moment's notice. If a fullback pushed forward, a midfielder would drop back to cover his space. If a central striker drifted wide, a winger might burst into the central channel. It was like watching a beautifully choreographed dance, where no dancer had a fixed spot, but all moved in perfect harmony, reacting to the music and each other. The ball, no longer merely an object to be passed, became the conductor, guiding the movements of the entire orchestra. This constant fluidity was complemented by two other crucial elements: high pressing and the ability to make the field big and small. When out of possession, the Dutch teams would swarm the opponent, pressing relentlessly high up the pitch, suffocating their build-up play and forcing errors. It was an aggressive, exhausting strategy, but one designed to win the ball back as close to the opponent's goal as possible, turning defense into an immediate springboard for attack. They hunted in packs, like a group of well-disciplined wolves, closing down angles and denying any easy escape. When they had the ball, they would stretch the field, making it big, pulling opponents out of position by using the full width and depth of the pitch, creating vast pockets of space. Then, with a sudden burst of passing, they would make the field small, converging on the ball, creating intricate triangles and quick combinations in tight areas to pierce the now disorganized defense. It was a tactical chameleon, constantly changing its shape and size, bewildering opponents who were accustomed to rigid structures. This adaptability was the very essence of their genius. At the pulsating heart of this Dutch symphony was Johann Cruyff. Cruyff was more than just a player. He was Michels' on-field general, the man who understood the system implicitly and could direct his teammates with a glance, a gesture, or a sharp word. He was the prototype of the modern playmaking forward, capable of dropping deep to orchestrate, bursting forward to score, or drifting wide to create. His intelligence was legendary, his understanding of space almost supernatural. He saw angles and opportunities that others simply couldn't perceive. Like a chess grandmaster seeing 10 moves ahead, he famously berated teammates, not for misplacing passes, but for thinking too slowly. A misplaced pass could be forgiven. A lack of foresight, a failure to anticipate the next 2 or 3 moves, was a cardinal sin in total football. He demanded mental agility, a constant awareness of space and options. For Cruyff, football was a game of the mind as much as the body, a constant problem-solving exercise. His frustration wasn't with technical error, but with cognitive sluggishness. This marked a profound shift. Midfielders are now thinkers, not just runners. They weren't merely winning the ball back. They were required to process information at lightning speed, to constantly reassess the ever-changing geometry of the pitch, to make split-second decisions that would either open up or close down avenues of attack. The pinnacle of total football's influence came with Ajax winning 3 consecutive European Cups from 1971 to 1973, and the Dutch national team's captivating back-to-back runs to the World Cup final in 1974 and 1978. In 1974, they ultimately lost to a pragmatic West Germany on home soil, and then 4 years later, in 1978, they were defeated by a host Argentina team. Despite not winning the World Cup, the Dutch team, with their vibrant orange shirts and dazzling play, captured the imagination of the world. They left an indelible mark, showing that football could be played with a liberating freedom, a creative spirit that flowed from every player. Total football was more than a tactic. It was a philosophy that championed intelligence, versatility, and collective understanding over rigid specialization. It proved that fluidity and constant movement could overwhelm even the most disciplined defensive systems. It opened the door for countless tactical innovations that would follow, fundamentally reshaping how coaches and players thought about space, movement, and the very nature of positional play. As the echoes of that beautiful Dutch symphony fade into the quiet, we can perhaps reflect on how the true genius often lies not in building higher walls, but in breaking them down, in freeing the spirit of the game, and allowing thought to flow as freely as a river. And with that thought, perhaps you can let your mind drift gently, like a perfectly timed run into space, into the quiet of a restful sleep, having just glided through the fluid, almost ethereal beauty of total football, where players danced between positions and the very air seemed alive with intelligent movement. Let us now return to a different landscape, one perhaps a little more grounded, a touch more earthy. We journey back to England, where for a significant period, football seemed to pause, to take a deep breath, and perhaps stubbornly resist the winds of change blowing from the continent. Chapter 8: English Grit. The 1970s dawned, ushering in an era of questionable fashion choices and even more questionable hairstyles. English football largely remained steadfast in its beliefs, while the Dutch were reinventing the wheel with their intricate patterns and positional fluidity. Much of England clung, with a comforting if somewhat predictable grip, to what it knew best. The favoured formation remained the trusty 4-4-2, a familiar friend, a solid, unyielding block of industry and effort. It was a system built for pragmatism, for hard graft, and for the kind of straightforward football that spectators, often wrapped in scarves and shivering on open terraces, understood implicitly. The tactical staples of this era were as reliable as a well-brewed cup of tea: long balls, often launched from the back with a hopeful thump, aimed vaguely in the direction of a burly centre-forward. Then came the crosses, pumped into the box from wide areas, again with a degree of optimism, hoping to find a head or a foot amidst the chaotic scrum of defenders. And above all, there was an unwavering reliance on sheer industry. Running, tackling, battling for every ball, these were the virtues celebrated above all else. It was football as a test of endurance, a gladiatorial contest where the last man standing, usually covered in mud and a triumphant grin, was the victor. This was football as an especially vigorous ground wrestling match, not a delicate and tactical fencing duel. And yet, even within this landscape of sturdy conformity, there were outliers, shining exceptions that proved the rule, or perhaps simply proved that genius can blossom even in the most unpromising of soils. Liverpool, under the successive masterminds of Bill Shankly and Bob Paisley, stood as a tactical anomaly, a beacon of sophisticated play in a sea of directness. They adopted elements of continental thinking, embracing a more intelligent, collective approach. Their defining characteristics were a compact pressing game, suffocating opponents high up the pitch, and a relentless focus on possession. Unlike their peers who often surrendered the ball with abandon, Liverpool valued keeping it, patiently building attacks, and moving it with purpose. Their defenders were comfortable on the ball, their midfielders knitted play together, and their forwards were clever movers, not just static targets. They were a well-oiled machine, smoother and more intricate than anything else in England at the time. Like a precision Swiss watch amidst a collection of trusty but clunky grandfather clocks. Then there was the unique, captivating figure of Brian Clough, an anti-establishment genius who carved out his own legend, famously leading Nottingham Forest to 2 European Cups. Clough, with his sharp wit and even sharper tactical mind, was a vocal advocate for intelligent, short passing. He famously dismissed the long ball game with a wonderfully pithy observation that perfectly encapsulated his philosophy. If God had wanted us to play in the air, he'd have put grass up there. For Clough, football was meant to be played on the ground with skill, precision, and a mutual understanding between players. He championed technique over brute force, clever movement over aimless running. He was an irritant to the old guard, a man who saw the game with a clarity that many refused to acknowledge, like a perfectly tuned instrument in a cacophony of banging drums. Despite these few enlightened exceptions, the prevailing tactical wind in England ensured that one particular player archetype continued to thrive, to be celebrated, and to stamp his muddy authority on every game. The destroyer role remained central. This was the midfielder who was less about elegant passes and more about breaking up play, winning tackles, and generally making life utterly miserable for the opposition's creative players. He was tough, direct, and utterly unsentimental. Think of players like Graham Souness, though at Liverpool he possessed considerable passing range too, or later, characters like Vinnie Jones, men who relished the physical battle, who were there to exert their will and to ensure that no opponent felt comfortable for a single second. The thread continues, the destroyer remains, tough, direct, unsentimental. He was the enforcer, the gatekeeper, the man who would willingly throw himself into the fray, head first if necessary, to reclaim possession. He wasn't subtle, but he was undeniably effective, a necessary evil for many managers who wanted to build their teams on a foundation of grit and resilience. This era in English football, though often criticized for its tactical conservatism, produced robust, fiercely competitive teams. It might not have had the artistic flourish of Brazil or the intricate patterns of the Dutch, but it cultivated a unique brand of resilience and determination. It was a time when the midfield battle was often decided by sheer force of will, where the clatter of studs and the roar of the crowd were as much a part of the tactical landscape as any coach's blackboard diagram. And as the echoes of those bruising midfield contests fade into the quiet, we can reflect on how sometimes, even in resistance to change, a certain undeniable character is forged. A character that, like a well-worn leather football, has a story embedded in every scuff and every stitch. Now, let your mind drift gently into the quiet, much like a perfectly weighted pass that somehow, despite the odds, finds its intended target. Okay, we've navigated the robust, often unyielding landscape of English football through the 70s and 80s, where the battle for supremacy was a physical, direct affair. Now, as the 20th century began its final, decisive decades. A new wave of tactical thinking emerged from Italy, not from the defensive Catenaccio of old, but from a visionary who saw football as a vast, interconnected puzzle of space and time. This was Arrigo Sacchi, and his AC Milan side would change the game forever. Chapter 9. Sacchi's AC Milan. If Catenaccio was about locking doors and hiding the key behind the kettle, then Arrigo Sacchi's football was more like building a wall that followed you around the room. Arriving at AC Milan in 1987, Sacchi was not a famous ex-player or a cigar-smoking patriarch of Calcio. He was, by his own admission, a humble shoe salesman. And yet, he carried with him a blueprint that would redraw the lines of modern football. Less concerned with reputation, more with coordination. Less about marking men, more about owning the pitch. At the heart of Sacchi's vision was a collective, almost telepathic understanding. A team not of 11 individuals, but of one organism with 11 limbs. His Milan pressed high, pushing the defensive line almost to the halfway line, compressing the pitch like a concertina. Risky business, you'd think. One mistimed step and it's all legs and shouting. But this high-wire act wasn't reckless. It was carefully choreographed, like watching a circus troupe balance teacups on a trampoline. Pressing, in Sacchi's world, wasn't just about chasing the ball. It was about surrounding it, smothering it, like a pack of well-organized crows descending on a discarded chip. The goal wasn't just to win it back, it was to reclaim dignity, territory, and momentum all in one go. Then came zonal marking, a phrase that sounds like something from urban planning, but in Sacchi's hands, it was a kind of defensive semaphore. Players no longer chased individual opponents like toddlers after bubbles. Instead, they guarded patches of turf with quiet vigilance. If someone wandered in, they were greeted. If they wandered out, they were handed over. It was, effectively, a neighborly game of he's yours now, mate. A defensive relay, the baton being a confused striker. This meant the team had to move as one. No freelancing, no dramatic lunges out of line. They shifted horizontally, vertically, diagonally, whichever way the ball danced. Imagine a murmuration of starlings, but with shin pads and sponsorship deals. Everyone adjusting, reacting, anticipating, like a silent school of sardines avoiding a net. When they lost the ball, they didn't panic, they pounced. Pressing wasn't just a response, it was a way of thinking. Win it back quickly, high up the pitch, before the opposition could so much as tie their laces. Sacchi's preferred shape was a 4-4-2, though to call it that is a bit like calling a Swiss watch a timepiece. On paper, sure, but in motion it was intricate, elegant, and unsettlingly precise. Franco Baresi, the sweeper who no longer swept, marshaled the defense with the authority of a chess grandmaster. In midfield, there was Ricard and Ancelotti, players who could crunch tackles 1 minute and slide in a pass like buttered toast the next. And here, the destroyer evolved. He no longer simply hunted down a man like Nobby Stiles might have done in his day, snarling and snapping in his dentally compromised glory. No, in Sacchi's Milan, the destroyer was more subtle. He hunted space. Ricard or Ancelotti didn't wait to tackle. They waited to intercept. They read the game like it was a novel they'd already memorized. Their job was to be in the right place before the danger even realized it was late for training. Not just physical grit, but tactical clairvoyance. Sacchi's success wasn't built on charisma or charisma's louder cousin, ego. He hadn't played the game professionally. He hadn't scored a last-minute winner at the San Siro or lifted a World Cup above his head. What he had was a brain wired for geometry, for spatial compression and expansion. He didn't see 11 players. He saw vectors, passing lanes, pressure points. He mapped football like a cartographer of invisible currents. While others shouted, he studied. While others guessed, he calculated, and that approach bore fruit. Not theoretical fruit, trophy-shaped fruit. Milan won the Serie A title in his first season. Then, like a polite sledgehammer, they rolled through Europe, winning back-to-back European Cups in 1989 and 1990. They pressed teams until they squeaked. They closed down space until it disappeared like mist on a morning walk. And they did it. Not with brute force, but with relentless unity, a team so synchronized it was almost eerie, like 11 men tied together with invisible string. Their success was a rebuttal to the old ideas. You didn't need a libero hanging around like a worried uncle. You didn't need to mark every man like it was a school field trip. You needed trust, timing, and enough courage to squeeze the pitch until it begged for mercy. The true currency of football wasn't flair or fury, but control. Control of space, control of time, control of movement. His Milan were not just winners, they were a system come to life, a proof of concept in red and black stripes. And so, as we let the memory of that elegant machine glide softly into the background, we might reflect on how sometimes the most radical ideas come not from the pitch, but from the quiet corner of a shop floor. From someone watching, thinking, asking not what has always been done, but what might be possible. Sidebar: the special one, Jose Mourinho, the art of pragmatism and defensive mastery. The tactical pendulum swung from the high-pressing zonal brilliance of Sacchi's AC Milan towards the intricate possession play of what would become Tiki-Taka. Another formidable tactical mind emerged, one who championed a different, often more confrontational, path to victory. This was Jose Mourinho, a man who, much like Herbert Chapman and Vittorio Pozzo before him, built his success on rigorous defensive organization, meticulous game planning, and an unwavering focus on the result above all else. His rise heralded a period where tactical pragmatism, often dubbed anti-football by critics, proved devastatingly effective against more aesthetically pleasing styles. A former translator and assistant coach, perhaps learning from the systematic rigor of Bobby Robson and Louis van Gaal, forged his own distinct philosophy. He wasn't about fluid, interchangeable positions or relentless attacking abandon. Instead, his teams were built from the back, characterized by immense defensive solidity, disciplined shape, and an almost clinical efficiency on the counterattack. He understood that controlling space, particularly in defensive phases, was paramount. His teams, whether Porto, Chelsea, Inter Milan, or Real Madrid, were often compact, difficult to break down, and ruthlessly exploited opposition weaknesses. He famously referred to himself as the special one, and indeed, his ability to craft winning machines, often from underdog positions, did feel uniquely special, while Sacchi's zonal marking was about pressing in unison to win the ball high. Mourinho's defensive mastery often involved a deeper, more disciplined block, inviting opponents forward before springing a trap. His teams excelled at suffocating creative players, forcing them into predictable areas, and then launching devastatingly fast transitions. He often deployed a double pivot in midfield, with one player acting as a pure destroyer and another as a link, providing immense protection to the back line. This was football as a war of attrition, won by superior planning and psychological warfare. Perhaps Mourinho's most iconic tactical triumph came with Inter Milan in the 2009 to 2010 season, where he led them to an unprecedented treble, including the Champions League. His semi-final victory over Pep Guardiola's dominant Barcelona, with a tactical masterclass in defensive resilience and counter-attacking prowess, became a legendary display of his philosophy. Inter often playing with 10 men behind the ball, frustrated Barcelona's Tiki-Taka, denying them space and stifling their intricate passing. It was a victory for grit, discipline, and tactical cunning over aesthetic idealism. A powerful demonstration that there was more than one way to conquer the footballing world. Mourinho's genius lay not just in his tactical blueprints, but in his ability to forge an almost unbreakable team spirit, creating an us-against-the-world mentality that galvanized his players. He was a master psychologist, adept at motivating his squad and unsettling opponents. His methods were intense, demanding, and at times controversial, but they consistently delivered trophies. He challenged the notion that beautiful football was the only path to success, proving that a pragmatic, results-oriented approach could achieve the highest honors. Mourinho remains a deeply polarizing figure, but his impact on modern football tactics is undeniable. He forced managers to think more deeply about defensive organization, about the art of the counterattack, and about the psychological dimensions of the game. He showed that stifling an opponent could be as effective, and at times more effective, than simply outpassing them. He was, and remains, a testament to the idea that victory can be sculpted from a different kind of clay, a more resilient, less flamboyant material. Now, let us drift forward again, across the continent and into a new millennium, where the ball would become more than a weapon, it would become a way of life. We arrive in Barcelona, where football became less about power and more about precision. A hypnotic hum of passes, a rhythm to dream to. Chapter 10. Tiki-Taka. The 21st century unfurled its digital banners. Football, too, found a new dialect, and it spoke in short, sharp, exquisite passes. This was Tiki-Taka, not just a tactic, but a quiet religion. In studs and polyester, preached most devoutly by Pep Guardiola's Barcelona, and echoed in the Spanish national team that conquered Europe, then the world. It wasn't about pace or power. It was about patience, geometry, philosophy, the game as a kind of sacred calligraphy, drawn in endless triangles across the canvas of the pitch, a ballet of angles, each pass a brushstroke. The ball never lingered. It whispered from one boot to another, never breaking stride. At its shimmering center lay short passing and a pathological aversion to giving the ball away. Every pass was a tiny proclamation. We have the ball, therefore we are. The rhythm was relentless but soft, like rain tapping on a conservatory roof. Opponents were drawn in, made to chase shadows until their legs burned and their heads spun. And these weren't your average shadows. No, they moved like illusions at a magician's convention, always just a fraction ahead of reach, just a toe's length out of time. Players turned in slow circles, realizing too late that the ball had already passed them twice and winked on its way. Then, when the time was right, zip, a sudden through ball, a clever flick, and the geometry unfolded into poetry. This wasn't chaos. It was juego de posesión, the game of position. Not about rigid lines, no. More like laying out a set of musical chairs, then allowing the players to dance between them depending on the tune. It was choreography disguised as freedom. Each player occupied a zone, but within it, moved with the understanding of a seasoned postman who knows which houses have barking dogs. The result? Constant options, constant overloads. A chessboard rearranging itself every few seconds, and always in your favor. At the quiet core of this humming machine was Sergio Busquets, not flashy, not fast, rarely seen in a highlight reel. But there he was, the metronome. A player who received the ball as if it had just told him a secret, who turned away from pressure like a man sidestepping a falling bookshelf. He didn't tackle so much as intervene, didn't sprint, but arrived, always in the right place. A gravitational center around which the whole team quietly revolved. Busquets didn't just link defense to midfield. He did something stranger. He slowed time. In the chaos of a pressing opponent, he would stand still, let the world spin, then pass the ball somewhere only he could see. It was less football and more sleight of foot. A magician who didn't need a hat or a rabbit, just a rolled-up sock and a sense of calm. Ahead of him, the artists, Xavi and Iniesta. If Busquets was the metronome, these two were the melody. Xavi, the eternal drumbeat, passing with the certainty of a man writing out his own shopping list. Iniesta, the painter, floating through gaps like mist through keyholes. Together, they sculpted the pitch into something smaller, more manageable. A coffee table, perhaps, just big enough to play a game of keepy-uppy over biscuits. There's a tale, told with quiet affection, that Guardiola once said to a young Busquets, "You'll see things before others know they're happening." It wasn't just praise, it was prophecy. For Tiki-Taka demanded not brawn but brain. An anticipatory intelligence that read the pitch like a detective novel where the butlers already confessed on page 1. You didn't just react, you predicted. You passed the ball not to where your teammate was, but to where he ought to be by rights. And so, the deep-lying midfielder, that destroyer of old, was reborn again. No longer a snarling tackler or even a zonal patroller, but a register, a conductor with mud on his boots. Busquets wasn't there to crush the game. He was there to compose it, to start attacks with a whisper, to guide tempo like a librarian, turning down the volume. His job was simple, impossible: to see the whole board every second and move the pieces without drawing attention. Barcelona's Tiki-Taka and Spain's conquered not just leagues and cups, but imaginations. Multiple La Liga titles, Champions Leagues, a World Cup in 2010. But more than silverware, it proved a point that control could be beautiful, that you could win without shouting, that domination could come through 600 passes and a gentle toe poke at the end. Of course, even beauty can overstay its welcome. After 2012, the spell began to fade. Teams learned to press the pressers, to attack the geometry before it could take shape. And Spain, once untouchable, began to look tired, like an orchestra still playing beautifully, but half a beat behind the tune. But that too is part of the story. For all its brilliance, Tiki-Taka was never static. It changed the game, and then it passed it on, as if the style itself had found the next open man. Critics said it was boring. They missed the point. It was football as meditation. A game played in murmurs, not roars. You didn't cheer every pass. You absorbed them, like waves brushing the shore. And now, as the carousel slows, and those rhythmic triangles fade gently into the night, we might reflect that the deepest truths in football, and perhaps in life, often emerge from the simplest of patterns, repeated until they become beautiful. So, sleep now, if you will. Drift like a soft diagonal ball, feathered into space. Let the metronome tick quietly on, somewhere far away. Sidebar: Forgotten Geniuses. Argentina's civil war of pragmatism versus idealism. As the world embraced new tactical paradigms, a fascinating, almost philosophical battle unfolded in Argentina, splitting the nation's footballing soul into two fiercely opposing camps. It was a civil war of ideas, a clash between two brilliant, yet utterly disparate managerial minds, Cesar Luis Menotti and Carlos Salvador Bilardo. This wasn't just about formations. It was about the very essence of how football should be played, a struggle between pragmatism and idealism. Cesar Luis Menotti, the architect of Argentina's 1978 World Cup triumph, was the embodiment of idealism. He was the romantic, the purist, who believed football should be a beautiful game, played with flair, skill, and attacking verve. For Menotti, the how was as important as the what. He championed what he called left-wing football, a game of creative expression, of individual brilliance flowing within a collective passing framework. His teams played with a certain aesthetic, a commitment to attacking football, even if it meant taking risks. He was the poet of the dugout, insisting on a style that would entertain and inspire, a belief that beauty and winning were not mutually exclusive, but intertwined. He believed football should be a joyous expression, like a vibrant tango. In stark contrast stood Carlos Salvador Bilardo, the mastermind behind Argentina's 1986 World Cup victory. Bilardo was the ultimate pragmatist, the unsentimental realist who believed that winning was the only thing that mattered, and that the ends absolutely justified the means. For him, football was a science, a meticulous calculation, often ugly, always efficient. He was less concerned with aesthetics and more with strategy, psychology, and exploiting every conceivable advantage, no matter how small. His teams were often defensively solid, ruthlessly effective on the counterattack, and capable of bending the rules to their advantage, all to achieve the desired result. He was the cold, calculating surgeon, willing to make difficult cuts if they led to success. His football was a brutal, efficient boxing match. The clash between these two philosophies, dubbed Menotismo and Bilardismo, became a national obsession, a proxy war reflecting deeper societal divisions. Menotti, with his emphasis on art and beauty, was seen as the inheritor of the romantic, bohemian spirit. Bilardo, with his focus on results and scientific preparation, was the face of the modern, industrial approach. The debate was fierce, often personal, played out in newspapers, cafes, and football grounds across Argentina. It highlighted a profound question that still echoes in football today. Is the game primarily about entertainment and artistic expression, or is it solely about competitive victory? The two World Cup triumphs, one under Menotti's idealism, 1978, and another under Bilardo's pragmatism, 1986, with the undeniable genius of Diego Maradona as his ultimate weapon, ensured that neither side could claim absolute superiority. Each had their moment in the sun, proving that there are multiple paths to glory. This enduring debate, this civil war of footballing souls, continues to serve as a powerful reminder that the beautiful game is rich enough to accommodate wildly different approaches, each with its own merits and its own passionate devotees. It teaches us that football, like life, is a broad church, where both poetry and blunt prose have their place. And with that thought, perhaps you can let your mind drift, gently, like the flight of a perfectly struck ball, into the quiet of a restful sleep. We've journeyed through the intricate geometry of Tiki-Taka, a philosophy that turned possession into a weapon, proving that control could be both beautiful and utterly dominant. As the calendar pages turned and the second decade of the 21st century unfolded, football entered an even more dynamic, almost dizzying phase. It became a tactical kaleidoscope, a swirling, shifting landscape where old ideas were constantly being reinvented, combined, and pushed to new extremes. The game, it seemed, had decided that pure possession wasn't enough. It needed speed, intensity, and a constant, almost dizzying fluidity. Chapter 11. The Tactical Kaleidoscope. Pressing, fluidity, and the return of the back three. The early 21st century saw a renewed emphasis on intensity, a furious acceleration of the game's rhythm. At the forefront of this shift was Jürgen Klopp, the charismatic German manager whose Borussia Dortmund and later Liverpool sides would epitomize a relentless, almost suffocating style of play. This was Klopp's gegenpress, a concept rooted in the idea that the moment possession is lost, the entire team should immediately swarm the opponent to win the ball back. It wasn't about retreating into a defensive shape. It was about attacking, immediately after losing the ball, turning a defensive transition into an offensive opportunity. The logic was simple. The opponent is most vulnerable right after winning possession, before they can organize. It was like a pack of hunting dogs converging on their prey the instant it stumbled, giving it no chance to recover. This demanded incredible stamina, collective aggression, and a mindset that viewed every turnover as an invitation to strike. While Klopp refined the art of the counterpress, other managers began to revisit older formations, dusting them off and injecting them with modern fluidity. The return of the back three was a significant trend, offering both defensive solidity and attacking width. Antonio Conte, with his disciplined and relentless Chelsea and later Inter Milan teams, championed the 3-4-3 revival. This formation provided a robust defensive base with three central defenders, while the wingbacks offered width in attack and tracked back tirelessly in defense. It allowed teams to dominate the flanks and create numerical overloads in midfield, a system built on intensity, direct running, and sharp transitions. Then came the variations, the subtle tweaks that kept opponents guessing. Thomas Tuchel, another German tactician, demonstrated the versatility of the back three with his 3-5, particularly effective during his time at Chelsea. This setup pushed even more players into advanced attacking positions, creating a relentless assault on the opponent's goal, almost overwhelming them with sheer numbers in the final third. It was a more aggressive, front-foot interpretation, turning defense into a launchpad for sustained pressure. And then there is Pep Guardiola, the tactical alchemist, who has consistently pushed the boundaries of the game. Having perfected Tiki-Taka, he moved on to even more complex, fluid systems, famously employing hybrid fullbacks who would invert into central midfield positions when his team had possession, creating numerical superiority in the middle of the park. This often led to what some analysts dubbed a 3-box-3 in possession, with three defenders, A box of 4 midfielders, 2 traditional central midfielders, and the 2 inverted fullbacks, and 3 attackers. It was a dizzying display of positional play, with players constantly rotating, creating overloads, and manipulating space to an almost infuriating degree for the opposition. It was football as a constantly shifting Rubik's Cube of interconnected lines and spaces. There's a revealing anecdote about Guardiola that highlights his unorthodox approach. When his Barcelona team once famously won 6-0 in a strikerless formation, it cemented his belief that traditional centre-forwards were not always necessary. He famously articulated that he doesn't need goalscorers. He needs zones to be exploited. For Guardiola, the goal was the natural consequence of occupying the right spaces and moving the ball with precision. It wasn't about a single individual hero, but about the collective understanding of spatial dynamics. About creating a perfect vacuum into which the ball could be drawn. This illustrated a deeper truth. In modern football, the player is often less important than the space they occupy, and the movement they generate in this ever-evolving tactical landscape. A new type of central midfielder has emerged, one who embodies the perfect synthesis of old and new. Here, the deep-lying midfielder finds its contemporary champion. Rodri emerges as the perfect blend of destroyer and conductor. At Manchester City, under Guardiola, Rodri is not merely a defensive screen, nor purely a deep playmaker. He is both. He possesses the physical presence and tactical intelligence to break up play with an almost casual ease, recovering possession in crucial areas. But immediately upon winning the ball, he has the vision, composure, and passing range to dictate the tempo, to launch attacks, and to orchestrate the intricate passing patterns that define his team. He is the ultimate modern midfielder, combining the defensive grit of a Styles with the creative acumen of a Busquets, a true midfield fulcrum who can single-handedly manage the ebb and flow of a match. The tactical kaleidoscope of the modern game continues to spin, driven by the relentless pursuit of perfection, the insatiable desire to find new ways to win. From the high-intensity pressing of Klopp to the fluid formations of Conte and Tuchel, and the positional mastery of Guardiola, football has never been more diverse, more complex, or more fascinating. It's a game of constant adaptation, where every solution eventually creates a new problem to be solved. And as the swirling colors of this tactical kaleidoscope begin to soften and blur, we can reflect on how football, much like life itself, is a testament to constant evolution, to the endless quest for new ways to express genius. Now, let your mind drift gently, like a perfectly executed pass across the pitch. Into the calm of a restful sleep, we've journeyed through the dazzling, often dizzying, tactical kaleidoscope of modern football, where managers and players alike push the boundaries of what's possible on the pitch. But beneath the surface of the formations and the pressing schemes, there are other, less visible forces at play, constantly shaping the game in profound ways. These are the unseen architects, the rules, the science, and the ever-advancing march of technology. Chapter 12. The Unseen Architects, Rules, Science, and Technology. Football, for all its passion and apparent chaos, is fundamentally governed by a strict set of laws, and much like the subtle shift in a prevailing wind can alter the course of a ship, seemingly minor adjustments to these rules have, over time, forced profound tactical re-evaluations. Think back to that 1925 offside rule change that birthed the WM. The pattern continued. The 1990 offside tweak, for instance, was a pivotal moment. This subtle change declared that if an attacker was level with the second-to-last defender, he was onside. Before this, being level meant offside. This seemingly small alteration encouraged more attacking play, promoting a higher defensive line and a more aggressive forward press. It was like widening a narrow doorway. Suddenly, more people could flow through, and at a faster pace. Attackers found new avenues, and defenders had to adjust their entire spatial awareness, playing with an even finer margin of error. Then came the seismic shock of the 1992 backpass ban. This was, for goalkeepers and defenders of a certain generation, a truly terrifying prospect. No longer could a beleaguered defender simply pass the ball back to his goalkeeper, who could then safely pick it up, gather his thoughts, and restart play. Now, the goalkeeper had to use his feet, often under intense pressure from closing attackers. This change, more than almost any other single rule alteration, forced teams to develop goalkeepers with genuine foot-passing ability and defenders who were far more composed on the ball. It killed off a huge time-wasting tactic and instantly sped up the game, forcing teams to solve defensive problems with skill and collective movement rather than simply resorting to a safe, if dull, reset. It was like removing the safety net from a tightrope walker. Suddenly, every step had to be perfect. More recently, technology has stepped onto the field, first as a whisper, then as a clamor. The introduction of VAR, video assistant referee, has added another layer of scrutiny, demanding precision in every foul, every offside decision. Goals are reviewed, penalties are re-examined, and the very flow of the game is punctuated by moments of technological reflection. And then there's SAOT, semi-automated offside technology, a system that uses multiple cameras and limb tracking data to make almost instantaneous and perfectly accurate offside calls. These aren't just minor adjustments. They are fundamental shifts that demand absolute precision from players and coaches, removing the gray areas and leaving no room for human error in crucial decisions. Beyond the rules, the unseen architects also include the quiet, meticulous world of science and technology applied to training and performance. Modern teams are no longer simply run ragged in training. Every stride, every sprint, every movement is recorded. GPS trackers, embedded in vests worn by players, collect vast amounts of data on their distances covered, their acceleration, their top speeds. This allows coaches to tailor training regimes with unprecedented precision, ensuring players are at peak physical condition while minimizing the risk of injury. Alongside this, recovery science has become an entire discipline. Sleep patterns are monitored, diets are meticulously controlled, and bespoke recovery protocols, from ice baths to cryotherapy chambers, are implemented to ensure players are fresh and ready for the next brutal encounter. It's a far cry from the days of a pint and a cigarette after a match, and underpinning it all is video analytics, vast databases of every pass, every tackle, every movement from every game. Coaches and analysts pore over this data, identifying patterns, exploiting weaknesses, and refining tactics with a scientific rigor that would have seemed fantastical just a few decades ago. It's like dissecting every atom of an opponent's game, seeking out the slightest molecular instability. There's a fascinating anecdote about the changing nature of the game's tools. Remember the World Cup of 2002? The ball used in that tournament, the Adidas Fevernova, was revolutionary. It was designed to be lighter, faster, and less predictable than its predecessors. And, as a result, it fundamentally changed free kicks. Strikers found they could make the ball dance in the air with unprecedented swerve and dip. It seemed to defy gravity, twisting and turning like a particularly mischievous spirit. Suddenly, the long-range free kick became a far more potent weapon. A testament to how even the ball itself can be an unseen architect of tactical change, dictating new ways to attack and defend. The midfield is now calibrated, not just coached. It's not just about a manager's philosophy, it's about data. It's about ensuring that every player in that central area is operating at optimal capacity, physically and tactically, within a meticulously designed system. Their movements are analyzed, their passes are logged, their recovery is managed. The decision-making is informed by algorithms as much as by instinct. The midfield, once a muddy battleground, has become a meticulously engineered engine room, finely tuned for maximum output. And so, we arrive at the quiet twilight of our journey through football's tactical evolution. From its earliest chaos, a pig's bladder, 30 lads, and not a clue between them, to the elegant equations of modern systems, drawn out in pixels, predicted by code. We've wandered from muddy fields to marble corridors, from instinct to instruction, from get stuck in to receive on the half-turn, from the simple, brutal honesty of pure athleticism to the refined calculus of spatial awareness and data-driven performance. We've seen the game transform from chaos into complex order, a living, breathing entity that constantly reevaluates itself. What becomes clear, as the last echoes of our stories fade, is that tactics don't stand still. They are not fixed monuments in a museum. No, they wander, they adapt, they evolve, just like us. A new rule, a visionary coach, a moment of individual brilliance, a technological leap. Each ripple creates a wave, forcing a rethink, a reinvention. The game is in a perpetual state of becoming, always searching for the next edge, the next way to outwit, and ultimately, to win. And as you finally drift into the quiet, perhaps you can conjure one last image. A chalkboard in a dark room, smudged with arrows, waiting for the next idea. It's always there, isn't it? The blank slate, filled with possibilities. The endless quest for the perfect formation, the unbeatable system. But the truth is, the search itself is the beauty. The endless debate, the constant evolution, the quiet contemplation of what might be next. Good night from Lower Leagues. And thank you truly for joining us on this very slow, very winding, very surreal journey through the strange inner life of football. We'll return soon with another tale to lull you gently toward the touchline of sleep. But until then, keep an eye on those Sunday league games. You just never know who might be stepping onto that muddy grass next.